Hello everyone, I'm Rabbi Dan, and this is the Parsha of the Week, the weekly Torah portion. This week is Parshat Bamidbar. This week's Parsha is very special, as all the Parshiot are. This Parsha is the beginning of the book of Numbers, and what is interesting about this book, the entire book, is that almost all of it is a detour from the main narrative of going from Egypt to Israel. When we begin this book, we are in the throes of finishing off our first mission after leaving Egypt, which was to go on to Mount Sinai, go near to Mount Sinai, receive the commandments, and also receive many of the primary laws and statutes of our religion, the Jewish religion. We then received the laws of holiness and various other laws that allowed us to be bound together as a Jewish people. We finish off the book of Leviticus, as we did last week, and we begin this week with a counting of the Jewish people, all seemingly leading up to going into the land of Israel. And only in a few weeks, when we are diverted from this mission, after the Parsha of Shalach, when we are told we cannot enter because of our fear of entering the land and our inability to believe in God and God's promise of entering the land, then we are told that we will have to wait 40 more years. But now we are in a moment where we could have entered, where we should have entered into this land. So Bamidbar should be only a very short aspect of the 5 books in theory. And so we divide the book between the first few sections that talk about our finishing off our mission, and the last sections, the majority of the book of Numbers, that talk about this detour. And the detour is really the darker parts of our time in the desert and perhaps our entire narrative. But this week we begin with a very important section of counting. And counting is what we do at various places in the Torah. So let's begin. You'll see here, this is Sefer Bamidbar, and we begin with this reading here of the Torah, of this particular book. Vayedaber Adonai el Moshe b'midbar Sinai b'ohel moed, ve'echad l'chodesh hasheni b'shana hasheni l'tzetam me'eretz Mitzrayim limor. And take 2. And God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, and spoke to them on the first day of the 2nd month. Now, when we think about the months of the year, you might think that the first month of the Jewish year is Tishrei, when we have Rosh Hashanah. But every time the Torah talks about the months of the year, we actually start off with the month of Nisan. And all of these months of the year are not actually mentioned in the Torah, the name of them. They're always referred to as the sequential months. So, if that's true, we are in the month of Iyar in this reading. But other than the month, all we're really told here is that we are in the Midbar, we are in the wilderness, in the deserts. And we will be told that in several places, and there is no real exact location that we're offered, even though in other places we are offered a place, even in the desert. There are various places in the desert that we are told where the Jewish people are. Most famously, we are told they're at Mount Sinai, for example, when they are there receiving the 10 Commandments. But here it only says in the Midbar. The Midbar, of course, is a very large location and a very ominous idea of being out there in the wilderness. The majority of our time In the Torah, at least the majority of the words spent speaking about who we are take place in this wilderness area. And the Midbar is often discussed as a very important point about why the Jewish people needed to travel for such a long time. Why could they not immediately go from at least Egypt to Mount Sinai, and then from Mount Sinai to the land of Israel? And even if we take into account the fact that they were there for a short time, it would tell us that there was something about being in this wilderness area. And all the more so if we consider the fact that the Jewish people were first told to be in the desert for the length of time it took to walk from Egypt to Israel. And as I mentioned earlier, we're told to go into the land after completing their mission. But with our knowledge now that they were not able to immediately go, that God punished them with staying in the desert for a longer period of time, that tells us that perhaps the punishment of being in this desert had something to do with what it meant to be in this area, to be in this land with no civilization, with no water, with nothing else but the reliance on God's help, and what it meant for us to be there. And God could have punished us in various ways, but he chose for us to be out here in the Midbar. So let's continue in our text. Se'u et rosh kol adat b'nei Yisrael l'mishpachotam l'veit avotam v'mitzpar shemot kol zachar legulgilotam. That God said to Moshe, specifically to Moses, to take a census of every part of the congregation of Israel by their families and by the fathers' houses, according to the names of every man b'echad chodesh, b'toch. So if we see here, we'll now look at Rashi to see what exactly it meant to count them and why he did so. So it tells us, first of all, mitoch chibatan lefanav moneh otam kol sha'ah, that the reason God counts us in various places in the Torah is that God, in fact, as we mentioned, finds us very precious to him. And he does this in three places. Number one, he does it in the book of Exodus. He counted them when we sinned in the golden calf. And of course, the golden calf, while Moses was up the mountain waiting for the Ten Commandments, the people thought that he was late. And the people counted incorrectly, but the people thought that God had abandoned them as Moses was late, and therefore Moshe, 3, 2, 1. Rashi's commentary tells us why exactly the people were counted, and moreover tells us why he counted them over and over again throughout the Torah. In various places, God commands Moshe, or God commands the Jewish people, to count who was there, count the amount of people. And it says here in the Rashi, the Midbar Sinai b'echad l'chodesh b'toch chibatan lefanav moneh otam kol sha'ah, that God counts us often in the Torah. He counts us often because we were and are so dear to him, and that those Israelites were dear to him. He counts them, and Rashi tells us specifically in two different places when we were asked to be counted. First, in the earlier part of the book of Exodus, 12:37. So let's go to that share over there. V'yisu b'nei Yisrael miramses sukatar ki shesh me'ot elef raglei ha'givarim levad mitaf. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, about 600,000 people, men, on foot, aside from children. So here, of course, as we were leaving Egypt, when we left Egypt, we were 600,000 people. And this is the first place that we have a recording of the Israelite people. Rashi then tells us that the next place we're counted is after the sin of the golden calf. V'yasu b'nei Levi k'devar Moshe v'yukol min ha'am b'yom ha'hu kishlosha elefei ish. Here, this is after the golden calf, and the golden calf essentially, very quickly, was a time when Moshe was up the mountain at Mount Sinai, waiting to receive the law, waiting to receive not only the Ten Commandments, but really the beginning of the revelation that God gave to the Jewish people. And while he was up there, the Jewish people thought that he was late. They counted incorrectly and thought he was late and thought that God had abandoned them, the Jewish people. So they made a golden calf to worship in place of Moshe. And after doing so, God, of course, was very upset and ordered that the main people in charge of creating the calf should be killed. And here we are told that 3,000 of the people fell that day. So here we see a very different counting. God tells us the exact number of those that are killed, and Rashi tells us within his commentary about when we count and why we count. He identifies two very important parts of the counting process. He tells us that in the first place, they are counted in 1237 as we leave Israel, all of the Jewish people united, 600,000 people, and also tells us that he counts us when the 3,000 of our people are killed after they committed a sin of the golden calf. And here, both of those, Rashi connects with these words that God counts us in various places because he loves us. This is striking. In both places where Rashi tells us he loves us, there are two very distinct events happening. One event is that the leaving of Israel, when God is saving the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt, we are 600,000. The other place he counts us is when we have sinned greatly before him. But in both places, God counts us in the numbers. Both places, Rashi tells us that God loves us. These are Rashi's proofs that God loves us. God loves us, at least in this commentary, in two very distinct ways. He loves us when we are being taken from Egypt, when we are unified as a nation, leaving this land to worship God, to go to the land of Israel. But we are also loved by God when we commit one of the greatest sins in the Torah, and that is the erection and the creation and the molding of the golden calf. And so the message here is very clear. God loves us no matter what we do. No action we can do would make God not love us. Even in our greatest sin, God still takes us into account. And we go on from there in the verses. Ve'el shemot anashim asher yamdu itchem, Reuven, Elazar, ben Shedeur. These are the names of the men that stand with you, of Reuven, of Simon, of Yisachar, of all of these different tribes we are mentioned in this verse here. And Rashi, even though they were counted in their lifetimes to tell their names, we are told to go and to count them once again. So in the book of Exodus, in the very first part of Exodus, we are also told of all of the names. And here again, we are told of all of the tribes. And so Rashi asked this question, why do we need these names once again? We are told that, that's our first point, that God loves us so much that he is loving of us when we are unified, we are going out in his name, but even when we are making the golden calf, we are doing great sin without his name. But it's more than that. It's more than God is counting us for his love of us. We are Also in this counting, for other reason, the other reason it is noted, but God does not only count us out of a love of us. Each time he counts us, there are different reasons. And the reason here is not clear. So for a more particular reason why God might be counting us here, we have to go all the way back to the book of Exodus. In the book of Exodus, there is also a significant counting, a significant display and recitation of all of the tribes of Israel. Before we mention that they were all in Egypt, we have to be brought up to speed in the first part of the book of Exodus. We leave the book of Genesis after Jacob and Joseph and all of that whole story. We pick it up again many years later after the king of Egypt no longer knows us, and we are all in Egypt. We also have to be counted there as well. And there we're told a very important part of the commentary as well. We are told these are the names of the men that stand with you. Of Reuben, Elitzur, the son of Sheor, of Shimeon, Shlumiel, the son of Surashadai, of Judah, Nachshon, the son of Aminadav, of Issachar, Netanel, the son, etc., etc. All the tribes of Israel represented by at least one person from each tribe. And Rashi there, again, the 11th century commentator, tells us that even though they were counted in their lifetimes to tell of their names, we go back and count them again to emphasize their greatness, and that they are compared to the stars who are counted in name and number. Hamotzi v'mistar tzava'am kulam b'shem yikra. And so here Rashi tells us that although each members of the tribe were counted when they lived, they're also counted in this group to remind us that God is making good on his promise. And this is the second reason that we'll discuss today, and the final reason we'll discuss today, about why the names are mentioned, why God does the census at the beginning of the book of Exodus. It is to tell us that he is making good on his promise. It's a promise that he gave to Abraham and Sarah, that he gave to Isaac, and he gave to Jacob, and to Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah in the book of Genesis. In the book of Genesis, we form the idea that God promises us that one day there will be a great nation. In the book of Exodus, we see that God begins to make good on that promise by taking us out of Egypt and freeing us from there. And as we go through the desert, we see various places where it looks like we may not arrive in the land of Israel, but we are reminded there also that we will get there, and that God will keep his promise. So here also, when God gives us this commandment to count all of the members of the tribe, and then tells us in the Torah all of those members, God is also reminding us of that promise that he gave in the book of Genesis. God is telling us that we will, in fact, continue to be and will rise to be great as the stars at night, great as the sands of all of the beaches. And we are told here that it is not only that God loves us, that God makes good on his promise. And this is really our message to us in a community that we attempt to make in many different ways. And here in our age now, it is hard to make community, difficult for us to make community. But a community is not just founded by living under the same roof. It is not founded by even going to the same activities. Not founded by communing together, because as we know, now we are not communing together. Our community is made by an interest of each other, maybe even a love of each other. God loved us and formed that community in his name and wanted us to be together. But even that desire to be together is not enough. God, in creating community and creating a bond to him, also creates and reminds us of a promise to us, of God telling us that we are faithful to him and that he will be faithful to us. So when we strive in our communities, it is not enough to like each other, not even enough to love each other. We, in order to make community that God is expressing here, we have to set out to what we can provide to others, what we can promise to others, and to make good on those promises. And so even in this time when we are distant from each other, there still exists a way for us to be together, to call out to each other, to know that everyone is thinking about us, and to promise that we will be back with each other to help each other and to be a community once again. Shabbat Shalom.